Here's the one thing I'm confident of, because I'm always looking for points of light amidst the Trump-induced darkness on the rule of law front. Now, I'm not pretending there's not more darkness to come. It's going to get darker. It's going to get more painful. It's going to get more unethical, more lawless, and more unconstitutional. And we can talk about the data points that support those conclusions, but the rule of law will come back into the light. I don't believe for a minute these imbeciles and incompetents are going to end the rule of law, end our Constitution, end our democracy, notwithstanding their efforts.
This is Black Man Spy.
Hi, I'm Malcolm Nance. Welcome to Black Man Spy. This week, I have another exciting guest that you're just absolutely going to love, because many of you know him. It's Glenn Kirschner, former MSNBC contributor, legal analyst, and a federal prosecutor with over 30 years experience. He served in the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia for 24 years, rising to the position of the chief of the homicide section. That sounds like fun. And in that capacity, he supervised 30 homicide prosecutors and oversaw all homicide grand jury investigations and prosecutions in Washington, D.C. And in this time of executive lawlessness, he has some pretty strong opinions about things. So buckle up and welcome Glenn Kirschner to Black Man Spy. Well, I'd like to welcome the guest of this week's episode of Black Man Spy, which is my good friend, co-analyst at MSNBC, former co-analyst at MSNBC, right? Both former contributors here. Glenn Kirschner, Mr. Justice Matters himself. I love you on TikTok. I love you on YouTube. I love you everywhere I see you. Your people are reposting you all over Blue Sky. And even on that former SpaceX, I guess, which is just to piss people off by putting your picture up. So thank you for coming to this episode of the Black Man Spy podcast.
Malcolm, it's great to be with you. I enjoyed our days together on panel, often up at 30 Rock in New York. Recently I decided to leave MSNBC and be 100% independent all the time. And you know what? It feels good.
It's liberating, isn't it? Because no one's reading your emails, and then Standards and Practices isn't calling you and going, you called Donald Trump a rat bastard. Can you modify that or delete that email? And of course, or text. And as soon as you do, everybody in Twitter land would come up and go, whoa, MSNBC contributor deletes text calling Donald Trump a rat bastard. Let me tell you, it was liberating joining the Ukrainian army. I don't know. Did you break your contract, or did you just didn't renew?
So I was with them for 6.5 years. I had 6 months left on my annual and sometimes 2-year contract. And I asked them very politely and respectfully, because I still have great admiration and frankly affection for the people at MSNBC, sure, if they would be willing to release me from my contract. We worked our way up through the chain, and I explained why, and it was really 2 reasons. 1, I wanted to be independent, and 2, I wanted to start going on center-right outlets to try to talk about the importance of the rule of law in as apolitical way as I could, to try to, penetrate demographics that MSNBC does not penetrate. I was preaching to the converted on MSNBC. Of course, I've done some of that, and, the thanks I get is pipe bomb threats sent to me and my family, but we'll set that aside for right now. I just wanted to follow Pete Buttigieg's lead and Eric Swalwell's lead and try to talk and listen across the Great Divide, and I'm still trying to do that. So there were a couple of reasons I wanted to leave. They were very gracious. They released me from my contract with the only condition being they asked me not to sign with anybody else in the 6 months I had remaining on my contract, which was not a problem, because I will not be signing with anybody else as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Well, I love MSNBC. Rachel Maddow is the person who brought me into MSNBC, and I love and admire everybody that I worked with there. I had nothing but professionalism at that channel. And I hope someday, like you, to be able to go back and impart opinions as they stand. But now let's talk about what's really important, and that is the state of the rule of law in this country right now. I'm just an old veteran. I'm just an old sailor, a very loudmouth retired Navy chief, and I got some things to say about it. But none of them have any legal weight behind it. None of them have any education behind it. Tell us, what the hell is going on with the rule of law in America?
Yeah, Malcolm. So I'm just an old Army guy, an old Army JAG starting back in the 80s. And then I ultimately transitioned to the Department of Justice after 6.5 years of active duty. Got to handle lots of great court martial cases, lots of great criminal appeals on the government side. When soldiers would be convicted at court martial and they would appeal their conviction, I would essentially be the prosecutor in the appellate courts, handle death penalty cases, espionage case coming out of Desert Storm. And I loved my Army time and my Army career. Problem is, back then they promoted you out of the courtroom at the 6 or 7 year mark. So I decided to leave the Army, join the Department of Justice, and that's where I spent 24 years as a prosecutor in the courts of Washington, D.C. And my frame of reference, Malcolm, for the rule of law is 30 years of 100% apolitical prosecutions. We made our prosecutorial decisions based on the facts and the law, and I swear I will say this under oath, never once was there a hint or a whiff of politics in any case I handled or I supervised, because I supervised hundreds virtually of federal prosecutors over my career at DOJ. And now it is the exact opposite. Everything is political, it's dirty, it's nefarious. The rule of law is not dead. It still has a little bit of life left in it, but it is on life support. And here's the one thing I'm confident of, because I'm always looking for points of light amidst the Trump-induced darkness on the rule of law front. Now, I'm not pretending there's not more darkness to come. It's going to get darker. It's going to get more painful. It's going to get more unethical, more lawless, and more unconstitutional. And we can talk about the data points that support those conclusions, but the rule of law will come back into the light. I don't believe for a minute these imbeciles and incompetents are going to end the rule of law, end our Constitution, end our democracy, notwithstanding their efforts every damn day. And I want to talk about Pam Bondi saying the judges are deranged, because that is a really important and telling data point for where we are right now. So, Donald Trump and company know that they cannot act lawfully and constitutionally and accomplish the horrific things they want to accomplish. So they're trying like hell to walk the rule of law deep into the woods and shoot it dead, but they're not going to get away with it. I don't believe they're going to get away with it. And I don't think that's opium. I don't think it's me being Pollyanna. One reason is the federal courts. If you want to jump right into that, if you don't stop me, I won't even take a breath for the next half an hour. Okay. So you tell me if you want to jump in.
No, but this is important. I mean, because I need hope. I'm not here to just try to cope and think that do nothing and say nothing and hope that things are just going to come, work their way out. Look, if the analogy you just gave, I'm hoping it's not, some scene from a movie with the Mansons, right? I hope, where the guy comes out whistling and chewing gum and cleaning off his weapon. I hope it's the scene from Gladiator where they take him into the forest and are about to stab him through the neck, and he turns around, kicks their ass, kills everybody, goes home. Yeah. So I don't know the strength of the system, because for a long while, I'd been told the guardrails are strong. They're designed to check each other. However, look, I'm a son of Philadelphia. I'm a real originalist to the Constitution. I walked the streets and raised in the streets of where this was all developed. And my problem is that they wrote the Declaration of Independence, the foundations of the Constitution, and then wrote the Constitution and ratified it with the belief that men are of good heart and goodwill.
Yeah.
And the places where they allowed for people to be rat bastards, they just didn't understand that there would never be another, King George III wannabe, or as I call him, Mad King Donald, who would say everything that you wrote is works, but for me. And I wrote in my book, Plot to Destroy Democracy, that what Trump and MAGA really want is what I would call a constitutional dictatorship or a constitutional autocracy, in which the Constitution is a fig leaf in order to hold over for people who adhere to their rule of law as they see it, and everybody else loses it.
Yeah,
So,
constitutional dictatorship sounds like an oxymoron, right?
yeah, it sounds like it.
You're right. They want to pretend to abide by the law and the Constitution, all the while taking a blowtorch to the Constitution. So you asked the question. It's an excellent question, and one for which I do not have an excellent answer because we haven't been through this yet. Will the guardrails hold? Is the rule of law strong enough to prevent us lapsing into dictatorship, into autocracy? We don't know the answer to that question because the ending is as of yet unwritten. But again, there are some data points. As a 30-year prosecutor, I have to look at evidence. I look at data points and I try to draw reasonable inferences from those data points. That's what I urged juries to do for 30 years because, you have to provide evidence and information, often circumstantial evidence. What does that mean? Lawyers like to use fancy terms so they can bill, 6-minute increments. But all that means is, if you go to bed, you look out your window before you go to bed and the ground is dry. And you wake up and you look out your window, now the ground's all wet. Did you see it rain? No. Can you draw the reasonable inference that it rained? And can you conclude beyond a reasonable doubt that it rained? Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to hold the defendant accountable for his crime by voting guilty.
Right.
But what if the defense attorney said, no, water truck came by in the middle of the night and sprinkled water all over everything? Well, maybe, but then there has to be evidence of that. And of course, there is none because we checked the county truck schedules and it didn't happen. This is the way we try cases. This is the way I reach conclusions based on evidence and applying reasonable inferences to that evidence. Let's look at some data points. Right now, when Pam Bondi, who is trying to destroy the legitimacy of the Department of Justice so she and her corrupt cronies, up to and including Donald Trump, can grift away and enrich themselves. She says the judges are deranged. First of all, that is an ethical concern, which should warrant a bar council referral of Pam Bondi, because that is the opposite of what the rules of ethics provide. We are supposed to say how we're supposed to handle ourselves as attorneys, particularly when it comes to the judiciary and cases in the judiciary.
Quick aside. You said it should have a bar council referral. Yeah. Which bar would that be?
If she's a member of the Florida State Bar, it's Florida. She may be a member of multiple state bars. Let me give everybody a 30-second Justice Matters Law School class. When you're a federal prosecutor, people might not know this, but you go to law school, you graduate, you take the bar exam, you pass the bar exam. You are now a barred member of the state, typically your state of residence. I was barred in New Jersey when I was practicing law. Once you hold a law license from one state and you join the federal government, the Department of Justice, you are permitted to appear in courts all across the nation, federal courts, all 13 judicial districts, jurisdictions. You just have to hold one law license. However, some people hold multiple law licenses, like Rudy Giuliani was barred in New York and was barred in Washington, D.C. Now, ironically, he is barred from practicing law in both of those jurisdictions because he's been disbarred in both of those jurisdictions. Right. He's lost his law license for what he was trying to do for Donald Trump.
So if Pam Bondi loses, let's say that she does something outrageous, right?
Yeah.
Which is coming if it hasn't already occurred. It's just a question of detection and backbone in that case. Let's say hypothetically, Florida disbars her because she clearly violates the Constitution, sets someone on fire. Who knows what it is? Can she remain as Attorney General?
Yes. Yep.
Does the Attorney General have to be a lawyer?
President can appoint a non-lawyer to be Attorney General. And of course, he is the all-powerful, omniscient, omnipotent, quasi-king, courtesy of the Supreme Court's presidential immunity.
Which was my next question.
Yeah, but let me get into the data points. The
Yeah.
public needs to understand that when the Attorney General of the United States stands up and says that the judges are, quote, deranged, I would ask her, and this is why I wish mainstream media, corporate media, legacy media would actually do the job I believe they should do. I was a journalism major undergrad. I have a reverence, a deep reverence for both the study and the practice of journalism. I learned at the knee of my mentor, Clark Mollenhoff, storied investigative journalist from the Des Moines Register, who was Richard Nixon's special counsel until a special assistant until Nixon went rogue. And then my professor, Clark Mollenhoff, turned on him and chewed his effing head off. And you can go back and look at the old newsreels of White House press conferences. Anyway, I have a deep reverence for journalism. When Pam Bondi says the judges are deranged, I would ask her, okay, I need to know who you're talking about, Miss Attorney General. Is it Judge John Coffenauer, who was the first judge to announce that Donald Trump's attempt to revoke the constitutional guarantee of birthright citizenship is, quote, blatantly unconstitutional? You know who appointed Judge Coffenauer to the bench? Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan. Or are you talking about Judge Harvey Wilkinson, who said with respect to the Abrego Garcia case that if Donald Trump can deport Abrego Garcia in violation of his constitutional due process rights, then he can deport American citizens in violation of the Constitution, and he can deport his political opponents in violation of the Constitution. Who was it that appointed Judge Wilkinson to the bench? That would be President Ronald Reagan. Wait a minute, not enough? Might you be talking about Judge Trevor McFadden, who just said you can't bar the AP from White House press conferences or events because it violates the first Constitution? He would be a Trump appointee. Or maybe, Miss Attorney General, you're actually talking about Judge Terry Dowdy, who just days ago said it looks like Donald Trump's ICE agents deported a 2-year-old United States citizen in violation of her constitutional due process rights. Who was it? Let's see, that appointed judge. Yeah. Oh, that was Donald Trump. These are the deranged judges, Miss Attorney General. No, you are acting like the deranged person because you are spewing propaganda to the American people and trying to destroy the legitimacy of the Department of Justice. Cut it the hell out. Play by the rules.
You know, I every week I do a podcast with Michael Cohen and Lev Parnas. And, you know, Michael, of course, who went to jail for years because Donald Trump turned the DOJ against him in a soft fashion, right? Through process and all of these things, and got him convicted. I think we're beyond what he's going to do with Michael Cohen. I think the DOJ, and this is just my opinion, of course, but the Department of Justice is now really, for the first time in American history, a lethal weapons system, a knife and a dagger that is being honed by the president. And it used to be unthinkable for the president to come out and say, I'm ordering the Department of Justice to carry out an investigation of this individual.
And when we're talking about the Chris Krebs,
right,
talking about who was the other one he directed be investigated? I forget. But these are people who committed no crimes.
Oh, no. They've committed crimes. Donald Trump has already told the Department of Justice what to investigate. This is upside down, topsy-turvy world. This isn't even the court of King George III, because they at least had a system in place, all right, that respected some form of rule of law. This is completely, to me, as a citizen, this is lawlessness now. The Department of Justice is a weapons system. And I hate hearing the phrase, they've been weaponized, as opposed to they are now a lawless organization that is carrying out, illegal acts.
Malcolm, one other example of that. I just interviewed Liz Boyer, the fired pardon attorney for the United States, and she was also a federal public defender for 10 years, doing the hard work of protecting not only her clients, but the Constitution. And, she said, I loved my public service as the pardon attorney. And yet when, a missive came down that Donald Trump's friend, Mel Gibson, wants his gun
Right.
rights restored, even though he's a convicted domestic violence offender. And she said, no, I certainly can't do that. And she wrote a memo to that effect. She was like, frog marched out of the Department of Justice literally hours later, locked out of her office, locked out of her files. They wouldn't even tell her anything about her health benefits now that she's left the Department of Justice. This is lawlessness and retaliation and corruption writ large in the harsh light of day. And they're getting away with it for the moment, day after day after day after day.
So this cuts over to Donald Trump's use of executive orders for literally everything. I personally look forward to the day that he goes, Malcolm Nance wrote 4 books about me, and I'm issuing an executive order against him, because then I get the platform to come out on television and call him the rat bastard that he is, and then explain in layman's terms. The problem is, by using executive orders, Donald Trump has superseded all powers of all other branches of government. Are they actually legal? And how do we determine, when are we going to find out, that they're not legal? Because apparently he's not withdrawing any of them. He's just are they all just being adjudicated in court, and he's just going to lay back, drink a pina colada, and then watch everybody argue while he dismantles the government?
Yeah, a lot to unpack there. So first of
Yikes.
all, he has emasculated the Congress, because so many of these executive orders are running roughshod over what are really the rights of the legislative branch. And thus far, Congress has been willing to lay down and just take it. And I think there will come a time, perhaps, that will change. I think they may have their August 1974 moment when they will have to march on the Oval Office and say, Mr. President, you're done. Because, and I'll talk about this at the end if I have a minute, and I hope you'll remind me. It's kind of comparing what's going on today with what went on during the Civil War, when the Union was at risk, and what people had to do to overcome their fear and keep the Union intact, and what I think we are facing today, and we will be facing it in full focus very shortly when Trump begins to openly defy all Supreme Court orders and rulings. And that is what I'm rooting for him to do that. And there's a reason I'm rooting for him to do that. So going back to the original point, executive orders, court after court after court are issuing what are called temporary restraining orders or preliminary injunctions, saying, stop. Executive order is blatantly unconstitutional. Stop. And all of that is working its way up through the appellate courts. But here's a shining example to support the assertion you made that Donald Trump is signing unlawful and unconstitutional executive orders, one after another after another. Judge Oric is a judge out in California. He is the one who just told Donald Trump, stop this nonsense about defunding city, county, quote, sanctuary cities. Stop it. And he issued a restraining order. Here's the thing. Judge Oric is the exact same federal judge who, during the first Trump administration, when Donald Trump tried to do the exact same thing, punish sanctuary cities, I will always put that in quotes, to get them to bend the knee to him, Judge Oric ruled that it was unconstitutional. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals affirmed that ruling and said it's unconstitutional. Judge Oric just opened his opinion with, here we go again. What does that prove, Malcolm? It proves that Donald Trump is knowingly and intentionally doing what have already been deemed unconstitutional executive orders. This makes him a repeat offender on the unconstitutionality front. And I think I want to see more of this, not less of it, because once the Supreme Court begins to issue rulings, or as Justice Sotomayor called it recently in the due process arena, edicts, the executive branch what it cannot do, and he begins to openly defy them, and I believe he will, that I think will galvanize two important swaths of the American population, law enforcement and the military, because then they will have a choice between obeying an abjectly, indeed proudly unconstitutional president of the United States who is trying to end our constitutional construct, obeying unlawful orders or disobeying
Right.
unlawful orders. His lawlessness is going to make it easier to make that difficult decision. Do I obey or do I disobey? And as we both know, I was taught an officer basic. I was taught again at the JAG school. We must disobey unlawful orders.
You know, we had this discussion last week when I had Lieutenant Commander Bobby Jones from Veterans for Responsible Leadership on, and we had a huge discussion on duty, honor, courage, commitment, duty, honor, country, integrity, and character in the armed forces. And then we got right down to that question: what do you do when an unlawful order comes up? Patently unlawful order. And in fact, I'm going to Greenland next week because it's pretty clear we're going to eventually invade Greenland sooner, probably rather than later, if we're not at war with Iran this week. Put that aside. But, to do it, you are literally going to have to order special operations troops, CIA officers, Air Force parajumpers, and, combat controllers to go and seize a capital city. And then you're going to have to bring up Department of Justice officers. You're going to have DHS officers, immigration and customs officers, which is why, and the reason I'm going this week, I should have gone 2 weeks ago, is because we found out that the U.S. consulate is being moved from a 500 square foot hut for 2 consular officers to a 33,000 square foot concrete a building dead center in the heart of the Capitol, which, as I like to say, coincidence takes a lot of planning. But to do it, a lot of people are going to have to view the president's orders to invade another NATO nation as lawful. And you look in the special operations, you can, they just created the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the new guy, was not qualified to be there. Former Air Force 2-star, a guy who wore a hat that said, MAGA hat, in uniform, and told Trump he will kill for him and die for him, has now been made the chairman of the Joint Chiefs. By the way, brought out of retirement above multiple 4-star officers. So by creating an alignment of officers, as you know, as a JAG, and by the way, firing the top 3 JAG officers in, judge, advocate, general officers in the Department of Defense, are they setting up for an unlawful order chain of command that will be responsive to them?
They're trying, and I believe they will fail, because let me tell you something, Malcolm. I do not believe for a minute he can fire his way through ethical military officers or NCOs or enlisted men and women. I don't believe for a minute he can fire his way through all ethical JAG lawyers. Try though he might, and I'll give the veterans on this that are viewing this will know this, but another 30-second Team Justice Law School class, as a we called ourselves trial counsel, which is basically a military prosecutor in the JAG Corps handling court-martial cases. The other thing I was the legal advisor to all of the commanders at 6th Infantry Division, Fort Richardson up in Alaska. And so sometimes a soldier would disobey an order, and maybe the company commander would come to me and say, Glenn, he disobeyed an order. I tried to give him what's called non-judicial punishment, Article 15 punishment, which is minor punishment for minor military infractions. And he rejected it because a soldier has an absolute right to reject Article 15 punishment and demand to be court-martialed if they believe they have a good defense or they have done nothing wrong. And the company commander was like, now I want to court-martial the troop. I said, well, maybe you can, maybe you can't. Let's talk about the order you gave him or her and whether it was lawful, because if it was unlawful, they had a responsibility to disobey it. And I will not ask the convening authority to proffer court-martial charges against him. Sometimes I had to give that hard advice, but it was my job. It was my responsibility and my sworn oath to the Constitution to make sure that nobody was forced to obey unlawful orders. So this is, and I believe there are more Mark Millies than there are Mike Flynns in today's military. And I think Donald Trump will end up learning that the hard way.
Yeah, but this goes to the point that this is exactly why Pete Hegseth was chosen as the Secretary of Defense. And his first thing was, we're going, gets rid of lawyers, right? So he could start doing things in dead of night. appoint
thing you do,
people
let's
who
kill all the lawyers.
right, kill all the lawyers and get, what he calls increase our lethality. Increasing your lethality means you also want to ignore any casualties that may occur in that. I've been, I didn't want to get into this to divert this far into it, but I've spoken on television and radio and podcasts about Donald Trump's comments about the annexation of Greenland and turning Canada into the 51st state. And when I gave an interview to the Globe and Mail in Toronto, I said, are you aware of what he means by annexation of Canada? He says, Trudeau said he wants to economically destabilize you. And then what? You wake up one morning, you all take down the maple leaf and raise your hand and swear an oath to the Constitution of the United States. I said, no, he's talking about invasion. And to do it, the soldiers up there at Fort Drum, right, in Watertown, New York, which literally looks at Canada, are you going to have those soldiers who go across the bridge every weekend and drink in Ontario and have a grand old time? Are you going to order them and the customs officers to go up and shoot and kill the Canadian Border Police and the Canadian Army soldiers that they coordinate with? I said, now you're looking at a situation that for the first time, perhaps since World War II, will devolve into mutiny. And it will be a lawful mutiny where they go, we're not doing that. That's a patently unlawful order. And you can fire your way down through the division to the brigades, to the companies. And you're going to have this 60-40 split where 60% will say no. And then you have that hardcore crazy 40, the barracks lawyers and other guys who will be like, we got to follow the orders of the president. And you get into a situation like you had in the movie, Crimson Tide, where the XO, the executive officer, is like, no, we're not going to wipe out the world. And the other guy goes, well, I have orders to wipe out the world. Yeah. And the problem is, we could literally see Donald Trump cause the United States Armed Forces to have, in my opinion, a lawful mutiny. And where the Army's like, we're going to sit this out. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff will be pumping out orders, do unlawful things, do unlawful things. And you're going to could literally have the National Guard unit in a state say yes because they're from a red state, and the first line U.S. Army units say no, and we're going to be someplace that has never existed in the history of the United States. Or has it? What would you say?
No, yeah. If it comes to that, I think we cannot predict how that ends or what that looks like. But I think what you just described, unfortunately, is a pretty good likelihood of where things end up. But you know what? They don't have to end up there. And I'm not going to say anything that people don't already know, but long ago, it seems we have discounted trying to pressure the Republican Party to save the Union, right? Because we've convinced ourselves that they have no spine, they have no courage, they don't even have a single vertebra back there, and they're not going to find one or sprout one anytime soon. So we've kind of just almost given them a pass now. But an old homicide detective who taught me how to be a homicide prosecutor back in the day used to say, pressure bursts pipes. And we have to start pressuring the Republicans again. I actually applauded Senator Murkowski when she recently said, we are all afraid, because she was speaking for her party and the members of the Senate. And, to which I would say, there was another time when a lot of people were afraid, right? During the Civil War, when people had to step up, grab muskets or, muzzle-loaded rifles, step out onto grassy open fields, put life and limb on the line, fight sometimes brother against brother. You can bet they were scared to death, but they overcame their fear and they saved the Union. Today, Malcolm, the Republican Party, the Republicans in the House and the Senate don't have to pick up firearms and step out onto grassy fields and fight brother on brother or sister on sister. All they have to do, literally, all they have to do is cross the aisle to save democracy.
Right.
Just cross the aisle to save democracy. I've been ending this rant with a riddle recently. Why did the chicken cross the aisle? To save democracy. It is not, it's actually not that heavy a lift. Yes, Donald Trump will try to primary you, and I still don't understand why there are only two Republicans, Kinzinger and Cheney, whose patriotism motivates them more than their own job prospects or reelection prospects. But all they have to do is cross the aisle to save democracy. And Malcolm, let's face it, then they get JV Vance. I call him JV Vance because that dude ain't ever going to make the varsity team. But you know what? Maybe they'll promote him to the varsity team. You'll still have your Republican president. Maybe JD Vance won't have the appetite to end our democracy that Donald Trump has. So, you could actually end up getting more of your Republican agenda to the extent you ever decide to focus on that again. You could get more of it pushed through with JD Vance.
Right.
Why are you not crossing the aisle to save democracy?
Michael Cohen and I had this discussion last week, and what we wanted to do was start a project because I had suggested it. I said, democracy can be saved by applying that Lincoln tactic of start promising things. Why isn't Hakeem Jeffries literally having all of his members find those 4 or 5 Republicans who are in blue seats, go to them and say, you 4 can literally, 5, starting with Don Bacon, right? You 5 can literally save the American democracy republic, and we will give you whatever position you want in the caucus if you become an independent and caucus with the Democrats and flip the House, so that we don't have to wait for 2026. And Michael Cohen's like, whoa, this is a great idea. Now he's starting a campaign to pressure these guys. And as you say, the stakes of saving democracy from a very patently obvious dictatorship, it's something that I certainly, if I was given that opportunity, and we're all being given that chance now, right? Why not take it? But, I think that Republicans, and I know personally, Republicans fear their constituents, and they really fear their constituents with guns. And it's not about losing their seat. It's not about being primary. I think in most circumstances, and that's I think Lisa Murkowski was talking about, was the death threats. You get death threats. I get death threats all the time, and they're really worried about that. My last book was called They Want to Kill Americans, the terrorists, militias, the malicious terrorists, and deranged ideology of the Trump insurgency. There is an insurgency. And I had said before that book came out on Real Time with Bill Maher, I said, if they win, they become a unofficial, self-deputized enforcers of Trump's will. And that's where they are. And I said, if they lose, they'll become an insurgent group, which they did. They had the insurrection soon after that. But I think they all feel very smug right now. But there is a band within them, and guys like Ivan Raiklin, that former Special Forces colonel who calls himself the Minister of Retribution, that these guys really want to go out and kill people. And this is what Republican congressmen are worried about, is they think they're going to be the next Gabby Giffords, only on a large scale. And we have to give them backbone. We have to give them enough support from both, from our side of the aisle to let them save us. Otherwise, people are going to wait for the 2026 election, and there may not be one because of the next question I have about you. The Enemy Aliens Act. The Republicans are talking like we are at war. They are saying we were invaded by a hostile force. Let's assume that there are 100 members of the Tren de Agua gang, and let's assume there's 1,000 members of MS-13. How, under any legal definition, does this constitute an invasion so that the Enemy Aliens Act could not only be invoked, but that the Supreme Court allows him to use?
It doesn't. And the courts have told him it doesn't. That's why they issued preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders, because that is also likely unconstitutional. So we can ask these questions all day long. How is this legal? How is that legal? It's not. And the courts are telling him it's not. Now, procedurally, here's where we're kind of stuck because we've got temporary restraining orders and preliminary injunctions, but those are like emergency stopgap measures. What those don't do is fully litigate the legality of invoking the Alien Enemies Act when we're not at war with any foreign country. And so it's going to fall entirely, but we're not litigating that yet because we're still in the emergency stopgap posture very early on in this litigation. And Trump is taking advantage of the courts moving slowly. They're speeding up for sure because they see that they're dealing with a runaway, corrupt president of the United States. But eventually, even the Supreme Court, I believe, will say, yeah, you can invoke the Alien Enemies Act and start deporting Venezuelan migrants because they have a soccer tattoo that you think looks like a gang tattoo and paying to have them imprisoned in El Salvador. You can't do that for half a dozen reasons. So to answer your question, it's not lawful, it's not constitutional, and they can't do it, but they do. And they're going to continue to, they keep pulling us closer and closer to the true constitutional crisis cliff. He's going to plunge us in to the unconstitutional abyss. And I look forward to that. I want to see it sooner rather than later, because that will help galvanize the opposition, not only in the civilian population, but I believe in the law enforcement and military populations as well. And ultimately, that's who we need at the end of the day to stand strong, because Donald Trump believes might makes right, and he believes he holds all the weapons. And I don't believe he will when he continues to violate our constitutional construct.
Well, I'm seeing violations of the constitutional construct every time I get up. I used to get up at 3:30 in the morning to write, because that was like the quiet time, 3:30 to 6 a.m. Then I can go do PT, run the dogs, whatever. Now I get up out of sheer effing anxiety over what mayhem has occurred because Donald Trump tweets about 2 a.m., right? He starts doing crazy talk very late at night or very early in the morning. And, I dread to open up my phone to see what craziness has happened. Well, one of the crazy things that really bothers me, is the fact that the Department of Justice apparently has brought upon themselves a ruling that ICE, Immigration Customs Enforcement, which, by the way, I don't believe these words would ever have come out of my mouth at any other time in history. That organization needs to be disbanded and rebuilt from the ground up using British airport or British cops who teach people how to be polite, right? Or bring in Australians or Irish guys, because they have turned themselves into, apparently, DHS, HSI, ICE, and CBP SWAT teams have all decided they are special forces, and that they now are the arbiters of what can and cannot be done. And they apparently love to execute the orders of Pam Bondi and Donald Trump. So, Pam, I understand now they're saying that they have the right to enter anyone's home and carry out a search and seizure of illegal immigrants. Because I'll tell you something, I have people coming to me right now. I know I'm my senior NCO, I'm getting pissed off voices starting to rise, but I have people saying there's going to be a gun battle if somebody, without announcement, without knocking, without identifying, and without a uniform and a warrant, breaks down my door to look into my house for illegal immigrants. And
somebody needs to tell them to have another look at the Fourth Amendment, my favorite amendment, right?
I read it.
Persons, the right of the persons, not the right of the citizens. Read the damn document. The right of the persons to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects shall not be violated. This is an easy call. Stand up to the corruption of the administration. Don't sell yourself and your honor and your ethics and your integrity and your oath down the damn river. Do the right thing. You'll sleep better at night if you do the right thing, even if it means you lose your job. Cheney and Kinzinger lost their job. Good career federal prosecutors are losing their jobs every day because they're standing up to the corruption. But do the right thing.
But you're appealing to their inner General Milley, their inner Oscar Schindler, right, to do what's right in the face of what's wrong. The good people who are in that organization are capable of stopping them when this thing goes careening out of control.
Is it salvageable? That's a question that I can't answer. And maybe it's not salvageable if the infection runs so deep and has taken hold and the patient can't be cured. Well, then sometimes you have to rework the entire agency top to bottom. Maybe
that's what I'm saying. Bring in. Have you ever met British cops, Australian cops, Border Patrol people?
Well,
nicest
yes,
people on this planet.
Almost in the family. Yes.
But they start from a different perspective. The United States, and I trained as a SWAT cop with Capitol Hill SWAT when I was in the military. I went through the school for their Heckler and Koch's Special Tactics School, and it's run by all Los Angeles SWAT team guys. Right, the way that cops now, or it appears that ICE is running, is that every person is an armed criminal. I have to assume they're an armed criminal, and I will engage with them. That every encounter is a full-scale felony stop, as opposed to, hey, little old lady, I've got this document. You have to come with us. And I'm afraid for them, because I think that they may, in fact, be careening out of control. We're going to pick this up at another time, because I'm not sure whether this is as important as the fact that there are officers who think the Fourth Amendment no longer counts. I mean, at this point, I'm ready for them to start quartering ICE agents and Border Patrol officers in my house. That
little known Third Amendment. We never had to talk about the Third Amendment before, did it?
That's what
ordering soldiers in our homes against our will.
That's right. I have to feed them, right? But I'm afraid now, because I'm afraid as a patriot that I'm having a hard time, and I think I speak for my viewers, in believing that these people will do the right thing at the right time to other Americans. They're taking children who are U.S. citizens, and instead of saying, yo, guys, this is a U.S. citizen, these 3 kids can't go. You can bop the mom, you can take the mom out, you can take the dad out, but this child here is on chemo. And I think what we need to do is we need to talk to, local child services or whatever, as opposed to screw them on the plane. U.S. citizen, I don't care, on the plane.
Compassion doesn't intimidate. Callousness does. And that's why they are acting callously.
The problem is, for me, as a person who spoke at Auschwitz in 2019 about never again, really? Which was the name of the conference we spoke on. It was about the rise of authoritarianism in the United States and the West. And now what you're telling me is for every one Oscar Schindler, there's going to be 200 very callous, officers who will execute orders, which may go far beyond this. And I'm afraid, and I think I speak again for the audience in saying, we're afraid that our own government and law enforcement has moved to the state of tyranny, and that these people who were supposed to be protecting, serving us, including myself, including the former the people who are in the intelligence community under Tulsi Gabbard, may enjoy the fact that they are going to be weaponized and do something fun and interesting, but the target is American citizens. And I'm going to need a shitload more reassurance before I can believe that this administration, which is the Declaration of Independence says, right, whose every act defines a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. And you're saying, is law going to protect us? Or what's the counteraction?
We don't know. I could answer, but it wouldn't be an honest answer. And I feel compelled to speak the truth as I understand it. We don't know if the guardrails will hold. They should, but we make our decisions based on some sort of minimal respect for the constitutional division of the powers of the branches of government. And if you have an executive branch that will absolutely not recognize the authority, the constitutional authority of the judiciary, as the epitome of which is the Supreme Court, when the Supreme Court says the executive branch can't do this because it's unconstitutional. If you have an executive branch that says, yeah, I got your unconstitutionality right here, I'm doing it anyway, we can't answer the question, will the guardrails hold? We don't know.
But didn't the Supreme Court create a snake eating its tail by giving Donald Trump absolute immunity?
If Donald Trump says, I don't like the ruling by Justice X, go pull him off the bench and imprison him without due process, without any legal charges, without a warrant. Just do it, because guess what? I get to do it in my, core constitutional functions. I am absolutely immune from prosecution. And guess what? I can pardon you for carrying out my unlawful directive, because the pardon power is another core constitutional function. So basically, the Supreme Court justices wrote their own sort of political or judicial obituary if Donald Trump chooses to go that route. The good news is they're the Supreme Court, so they can do whatever they damn well please, including revisiting that precedent if Donald Trump defies their orders. So, you know what? There's always a little crack of light somewhere, but I'm not going to pretend that light will outshine the darkness that we're experiencing right now.
I am fanning myself with a Faraday bag, by the way, so that I can protect my electronic transmissions. Because apparently what you're telling me is that, at any given time, we could all be in Richard III, and people could be asking for us as meddlesome priests to be eliminated, and it would all be legal. But let me make one last point before we go, and I give you my last question. If my viewers have ever watched the movie Justice and Judgment at Nuremberg with Spencer Tracy, I always call to the fact that the people who are being prosecuted in the Judgment at Nuremberg, right, Burt Lancaster, is the Supreme Court of Nazi Germany. And the lawyers, the Attorney General, I believe, also, everyone who, as Spencer Tracy said, when you made a ruling that you knew legally would send people to their deaths, and you made a ruling that made it legal to take property from people, that you yourself created a lawless state through laws. And it's always remarked to me, and I say this every time, Anne Frank was breaking the law by being a Jew that was hiding from the Gestapo. And her neighbors who turned her in were obeying the law of the Dutch Nazi Party to turn in every Jew to send them to their death. So what can our viewers do as counteraction? What is it going to be? I mean, is it going to have to be? I'm calling for a second American Revolution, what I call the people power color revolution, where we get 50 million people onto the streets. Don't forget, 76 million voted for Kamala Harris, and we've only gotten out 5 million thus far. But legally, what can we do that will prevent them from carrying out the Insurrection Act for general protest?
I've often thought in recent weeks, when his poll numbers are getting so just obscenely bad for him, that he is celebrating that. He wants 100% of the American people, against him, because that will drive people out to the streets. He'll use it as an excuse to invoke the Insurrection Act, declare martial law, and then accomplish what he asked his folks to do during the first term: just shoot the protesters in the legs, for God's sakes, right? So that may be where we're headed. What can people do? Everybody wants to know, what can people do? First of all, do something rather than nothing, because nothing will never make you feel good. Do something. And I'm not going to run through the litany of the somethings that people already know about. Contacting every elected official, from your city council or town council member up through your United States senator. I don't care if it's red or blue, because pressure bursts pipes. Call them all early and often, write them, do all of that. Protest. I spoke at the last hands-off rally a few weeks ago here in Loudoun County. We've got one out in Berryville, Virginia on May 1st. I'll be speaking at that one as well. Protest, because, courage really is contagious, and it's important. So keep doing that. But you all know that, right? you all know that you can give to your officials, your candidates that you believe sort of align with your political interests and priorities. We know all of that. Here's the thing people may not think of, and this is really important. It's not intuitive, but it's important. There are nonprofit organizations right now, Malcolm, as you well know, that are in court every day fighting for our rights. Literally dozens of nonprofits. I always hesitate to start spitting out the names because I can't possibly cover them all, whether it's CREW or ACLU or American Oversight of Democracy Now! They go on and on and on and on. In a very real sense, these people are our lawyers. They're in court every day fighting against the lawlessness and unconstitutionality of the Trump administration, and they're winning hands down in almost every case. But we're not retaining these people. We're not paying these people. We're not supporting these people. But dang, we should be supporting these people. I'm not saying you have to send money to every organization. I'm not saying that. I don't tell people who to donate to. But you know what? You can maybe help raise funds for these organizations that are supporting and defending our rights. Make calls, knock on doors, set up a card table outside your grocery store. These are our lawyers fighting our battles, but we're not even paying them to do it. Please, so you can go on Just Security, which is a great website. It has a litigation tracker with every single case. Find nonprofit organizations that you think are doing the work that you really value and help them in whatever way you can, because doing something always feels better than doing nothing. Plus, it helps the cause.
All right. Well, great. Okay, I feel a little better.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'll use my electronic shielding bag to chillax for a minute. I'm going to need a lot of double espressos to work my way through the things that you've said today. But I do feel somewhat a bit of hope. And more importantly, I feel informed now because I'm hearing a lot of stuff out there. We know people are not watching, unfortunately, not watching MSNBC anymore. I got people tell me right to my face, never going to watch it again. So they're not hearing Joyce Vance. They're not hearing some of the big names who were out there who would normally be the law splainers in chief of what's going on out there. And there's a lot of things that I think people need to know about. And I'm glad you came on here and explained them to me, even though you're going to make me go
even
out.
though we scare the bejesus out of each other all the time. I know you scare me on the national security front all the time. But here's what I'll say. And yes, I love Joyce Vance and Barbara Quaid. I learned from them. But independent media is on the rise, importantly so. So, for example, I'm on Substack now. I went to the Substack counter programming to the White House Correspondents' Dinner. I used to go to that dinner, but
I missed that.
Enamored of it anymore. So I'm on Substack doing a legal splainer every night, sometime between 7:30 and 9 p.m. on the legal issue of the day. It's a 10 to 12 minute stream of consciousness. I try to follow the comments as they pop up and answer questions. But it is, I try to translate everything from legalese into English, and I do it every night live on Substack. I do it every day on my Justice Matters YouTube channel. I do a legal analysis video every single day, 7 days a week. We are almost at 1 million subscribers. We have 998 today.
Wow.
So I would appreciate anybody who goes on and subscribes. It's always free. And let me hasten to add, I don't put anything behind a paywall, even on Substack, even though I can. There are ways you can support me, but I don't ever want to put a single word of my content behind a paywall anywhere, because I have been blessed with 30 years of being able to learn the criminal law and processes, and I just want to use it now to help fight for democracy, because guys like you and me, we're like free agent democracy fighters right now. That's what we are.
All right, great. Well, thank you for coming on Black Man Spy. Thank you for bringing the legal world together with, the followers and practitioners of the intelligence world and military world, and explaining for my viewers just how dire the situation is. And so everyone follow Glenn Kirschner on Justice Matters. He's on Substack. I'm on Substack. Subscribe and then do something. Get out there and hit the streets. Thank you, Glenn, for coming on board Black Spy. I always say Black Spies Matter. Black Man Spy. And we do.
With you, Malcolm. Thanks.
All right. Take care. For those of you who may not know it, the way that we dispose of trash in the intelligence community is by using a device known as a burn bag. And in fact, a burn bag, which I'm showing here, is a tan-colored bag with 5 red stripes, 5 white stripes that alternates down the side of the bag. And this is where we put refuse that we can no longer use, that needs to be thrown into a furnace and destroyed so it doesn't fall into the hands of nefarious people. And that's why I have a section every week I call Burn Bag of the Week. And these are individuals who really need to be thrown into the trash and disposed of in a manner in which they can never revive themselves. And this week's Burn Bag of the Week is the, I'm using air quotes here, director of the FBI, Kash Patel. But Malcolm, what has Kash Patel ever done to you besides spout off crazy QAnon theories and help subvert the rule of law during the entire Russia investigation? Well, now he's the chief cop in the United States Federal Investigations Body. And with his deputy, former Secret Service member, Dan Bongino, who is another person that has a real problem with truth, they have both been elevated to the number 1 and number 2 positions in the Justice Department for federal investigations, that being the director and deputy director of the FBI. But this week, Kash Patel gets the special honor of Burn Bag of the Week because he ordered his officers to arrest a judge, a sitting judge, as she was doing her job of adjudicating the law. Now, I'm not going to go into the details because everybody already knows about this. He ordered federal officers to arrest this judge in her chambers at court because in his interpretation of the law, as passed on through Pam Bondi, and again, air quotes, the attorney general, they decided that she had assisted and harbored a illegal immigrant or an undocumented immigrant from being arrested in her courthouse. Now, arresting this judge has brought us to the point where the judicial branch and the executive branch are misusing law enforcement to essentially nullify the position of a federal, not a federal officer, but in this case, a judiciary officer of the court, because they don't like what she did. She runs her courthouse the way she runs fit, and federal law enforcement officers going inside and arresting individuals is not about getting criminals out of the United States or illegal immigrants out of the United States. They were already in a courthouse. It is doing it by the way that Kash Patel and Pam Bondi and Donald Trump want it done, which is to throw our laws and the separation between the equal branches of government, the judiciary and the executive, into the trash. And for that, Kash Patel is Burn Bag of the Week. Somebody needs to tie it up, roll the top down, staple it across there, mark it for burn, take it over to the chute, and throw it into the classified disposal, because what he did is nothing more than decide that he is going to decide what the Constitution can and cannot do with regards to each different branch of government. Only a burn bag would believe that this is something that he should do and think that that is upholding the Constitution of the United States. With that, this is the end of this week's episode of Black Man Spy. And as you know, I usually like to go out on a quote from Rudyard Kipling. I am Kipling challenged these days because apparently people within the United States are finding that their laws, their rights, their freedoms are constantly being tested. So instead of going to a 19th century scholar, spy, and poet, I've decided I'm going to go somewhere a little more close to our hearts. And I've mentioned this before. So I have this mug from Steinhagen Pottery, Griswold, Connecticut, a husband and wife that make these Revolutionary War era style mugs with quotes from the American Revolution, the founding fathers, and other great quotes from American history. And in this week, instead of Rudyard Kipling, I'm going to read this quote from Phyllis Wheatley, the African-American poet who lived in Boston during the American Revolution. And she wrote, "In every human breast, God has implanted a principle of which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance." And I know if you're watching this podcast or listening to this podcast, you believe in the American love of freedom. There's an old joke that says British die for honor, the French die for love, but Americans will die for freedom. The rest of the joke is, and Russians just die. But in this particular circumstance, it's true. Americans love the phrase liberty and freedom brought us to where we are 249 years ago. And this beautiful quote, which I love, it sits on my mantle, I look at it from time to time, from Phyllis Wheatley, should remind all of us the stakes of what we are fighting for today. We are in the midst of a second American Revolution, and it is our job to stand up and let people power save the values of the first American Revolution, which are under a full-scale attack by a wannabe dictator, right? As we said, every act which defines a tyrant, which is on another one of these awesome mugs from the Declaration of Independence. Thank you for coming to this exhausting Black Man Spy. I'm Malcolm Nance. I want to encourage you to share this with your friends, clip it up, put it on Twitter, cut it up, put it on Substack. And if you want, share it on Apple Podcasts, which is where you can find it, Stitcher, and other great locations. And find me on Substack. That's where I do my writing. Like Glenn Kirschner, everything I put out there is free. You can comment on it, become a paid subscriber if you want to support me, and come and join the conversation of how we are all going to save the first revolution by becoming the Minutemen of the second American Revolution. Thanks for coming. Hopefully, I will see you next week in some place that might be a little different. But stay tuned and come back and watch Black Man Spy.